I became suicidal. I was drinking a lot. I ended up back at my apartment with a gun in my throat in the closet. My name's Christopher John Stubbs. I have been doing deep transformation work for 25 to 30 years, and I've been professionally guiding and supporting and assisting others for almost 19 years. And I've gone to the ends of the earth, to extreme places to integrate and embody as much goodness as I can and heal as much trauma as I can and empower myself with as many skill sets and mindsets as I can. Essentially, I'm an avid student who is very passionate about testing out and seeing what works out there and then sharing it with others so that they can create as fulfilling and joyful and successful of lives as possible. As a late teenager, riding in the car with my dad, we worked together in a company that we co-owned, and he would listen. I wanted to listen to the popular radio stations, and he'd be listening to Deepak Chopra and Wayne Dyer and Paul Farini and Neil Donald Walsh and all these guys. First, I was incredibly bored and annoyed, and over time it started to sink in and I started to see the value, and I got to where I would rather listen to those things than other things. So that started in my late teens. So for the first up till about 25 years old, 8 years or something, I was primarily just listening to very deep spiritual audiobooks and reading books. Started off with near-death experience books and spiritual books and things like that. Meanwhile, I was growing a large and successful company and had a wife and a kid. And then at 25, we went through a separation for a year. And that was absolute hell for me. It really brought up all my deepest wounds and traumas from childhood that I had been sugarcoating over and just ignoring, assuming that if I had a good positive attitude and a strong work ethic, that's all I needed. And I realized at age 25, I needed to start diving in deep to heal those wounds and come to wholeness with my family of origin and with myself. And how that came about is when we were separated, I became suicidal. And I was drinking a lot, and I ended up back at my apartment with a gun in my throat in the closet and almost pulled the trigger. Shortly after that, my oldest brother enrolled me into an 8-day healing retreat, and that really set me off on my path. There's much more to the story since then, but that was the beginning. Society has evolved a bit today to where nowadays mental health is more common to proactively take care of yourself and get help. Back then, it was less common. If you had a therapist, you were, oh man, you must have issues. And now it's just common, like more common knowledge. Like we all have trauma. I don't care if you grew up in the perfect family and all the things, like everybody has trauma. If you're alive and on planet Earth, you have trauma, and there is trauma happening even now. If you're aware and alert, everything we're going through collectively is traumatic. So essentially, if you can acknowledge, like, hey, no matter who you are, no matter how good your life is or has been, no matter if it comparatively isn't nearly as rough as some people's, or you're one of those that are like, man, yeah, I had a really rough childhood in life. We all have trauma. And self-love is key. If I were to boil it down to the most two critical pillars of concepts or topics to explore, it would be developing unconditional love and impeccable integrity. But if I were to make that more actionable, it would be begin by learning to love the hard to love place tools, breath work, emotional intelligence, meditation, and probably the most critical thing I would say to begin learning would be transmutation, the ability to transmute the pains and the traumas of the past. And the person that's helped me the most with that is Michael Singer. And the book that really helped that sink in for me was his book called Living Untethered. Now, a lot of people will listen to that, get some concepts, grasp a small percentage of it, and go, yeah, that was good. And what I ended up doing that absolutely changed my life was listening to that book 20 or 30 times, taking copious notes, studying and then meditating and contemplating and taking notes. And I would make lists of all the pains I had and all the people I judged and all the people that had hurt me and all the people that I had hurt. And then I would do breath and meditation exercises to transmute those experiences so that I no longer had to carry them with me into future relationships and into future dynamics and different things. To briefly explain transmutation, it would be the scientific concept that energy never dies, it only changes forms. That everything, I would liken every pain and trauma and or suppressed emotion that's still stuck in your body or your being is like a lump of coal. And that for however long you've been having experiences in life, you've been building up these lumps of coal, and that you've got a big stockpile of coal that you carry with you into every now moment. And so the past keeps informing the present, which informs the future. So clearing those out is probably the number one foundational thing that we can do. That's the most critical thing for having a life that you love and for moving on from a clear space. It's like a second lease on life. So transmutation would be like you build a fire and you start burning off this stockpile of coal. And then as you learn to transmute and surrender to each moment as it comes, you stop building that stockpile. Because not only have we stored that up, we're continuing every time we react to something that's happening in our life and go into a fight or flight response, and then don't transmute the trauma associated with that, we add another lump of coal to that stockpile. Stopping adding to it and then clearing out all the old ones, I would say, is the number one most critical thing we can do to completely change our life. And it's something you can do anytime, anywhere, anyhow, without it having to have anything outside of you, just the ability to slow down, go within, breathe, observe. There's some honing and developing of the ability to do that very rapidly and effectively, but it's the most liberating thing I've ever done and the most life-changing thing I've ever done. Avoiding, numbing, distracting, chasing, running, medicating, those are the tendencies we have with these things. I did go back through and into those things. And I did that for years and it was very helpful. But what I'm finding with the transmutation, with the refinement of my ability to understand and implement transmutation, even a lot of the work we've done over the years, because those of us who've been in the game for a long time, we've done a lot of shadow work and we've done inner child work and we've done many different modalities, rebirthing and all kinds of stuff. From studying the work of Michael Singer, we've done timeline regression therapy and we've done Gestalt therapy and we've done all kinds of things over the years. And this is actually much faster and we don't have to even think about. In fact, it's like a lot of people have said, follow your heart. What they don't realize is we have a higher heart and a lower heart. We have a higher mind and a lower mind. And so follow your heart is good advice if you actually know how to follow your higher heart. And it can be very destructive and cumbersome process if you're following your lower heart, because the lower heart and lower mind are driven by what's called samskaras, which are things that anything that happened in our life that was too much to take in. A definition of how trauma is created that's come out in recent years that says anything that was too much, too fast, too soon. Well, we tend to think of trauma as only negative experiences. Even the term negative and positive are labels or judgments about what it was. But the reality is, if it was too much, too fast, too soon, whether positive or negative, and we weren't able to completely be with and absorb and fully experience and feel everything related with whatever happened, either positive or negative, we actually created another lump. Our desires aren't driven by our essence. They're driven by our cravings and our aversions, or the things we resist and the things we chase. I don't know if you know the story of Maya. It's in Eastern philosophy, I think from Hinduism. Essentially, like, she's the great distractor. And we tend to think from our religious conditioning that we would only be distracted by alcohol and drugs and porn and sex and all these things. But the reality is there's a lot of distractors, even in the New Age community and the spiritual communities. So a lot of the modalities we've learned over the years were helpful to getting us here. But what I'm finding is this cleaner level of transmutation is much more fast and effective. And it doesn't involve having to go back and relive anything. It actually involves being so fully here, and we're just breathing and going into the stillness, and whatever arises, instead of reacting to it from our lower heart, lower mind, we're being the observer of the lower heart, lower mind. And so if I was sitting here and some neighbors are down the street and it was a couple and they stepped out on their front porch and they're arguing and yelling and calling each other names, I would go, man, they're having a rough time, but it wouldn't have a huge impact. It wouldn't be like, oh man, the same way historically it has when I was the one having that argument. When we sit back in the seat of our soul and begin to observe what's happening in our lower heart, lower mind, without feeding into it, without trying to figure it out, without trying to fix it, without believing that we need to heal something. We're sitting in our divinity, in our essence, knowing our wholeness as we are now, while the storm's going on in our lower heart, lower mind, and we're just observing it. We're not buying into it. We're not trying to solve it. We're not trying to fix it or figure it out. We're holding a loving, compassionate space the way a mother would for a child, for ourselves. And through this non-judgmental awareness, you can literally just sit back and give loving, compassionate awareness and sit with it all and allow it to rage out without avoiding it or diving into it. You're just being with it.